Is your financial portfolio going underwater right now? Are you worried about the bond and the stock markets? Well, you need to stop buying the same things and diversify your portfolio, and I'm going to show you exactly how.
We got a dollar, we got a dollar, we got a dollar, hey, 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 hey. We got a dollar, we got a dollar, we got a dollar, hey, 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 hey.
Now, a lot of your financial woes come directly from spending too much money on plugins. You're buying the same exact plugins multiple times and they're doing the same exact thing. You got a LA-2A from here and then LA-2A from there, a LA-2A from here and another one up here. And oh my gosh, all of a sudden you're looking and there's LA-2As all over your computer. You're spammed up to the top of your computer and you can't click anything. It's because you're buying too many of the same plugins. We're gonna fix that right here. I'm gonna show you which one is the best one and so that you don't have to keep buying the same thing. So that is a lot of LA-2As. You have a lot of options here. Let's talk about it. First, we have the Waves CLA-2A. This is a classic plugin. This one is probably maybe close to a decade old or more now. Good on the CPU, but you have some other options now in the market that are really killing it. You have right here the Native Instruments VC-2A. Now this guy is made by Softtube. This is a really, really good LA-2A option here. And then you have the BX Opto, which is another little fancy LA-2A plugin with some pretty cool bells and whistles. And then lastly, you have the classic, the go-to Teletronix LA-2A from Universal Audio, who also created the original LA-2A hardware unit. So what is an LA-2A? What are these random numbers and letters put together? Well, it is an optical compressor. This thing is a classic plugin. This has been heard on pretty much every major record, I would say, in the last 50 years. This thing was created in the 70s. It's a very gluey kind of vintage sounding compressor. And that's kind of what it's known for. If you need something with some vibe that will kind of glue stuff together, it'll smooth it out, and it's not something that will make things harsh. It is kind of the opposite. This thing was created originally by Bill Putnam of Uri, which was later renamed / recreated into Universal Audio. So that's why you have kind of the original up here. And when I say original, it's kind of based upon the design from the 70s, if you can see why this thing is so gray versus kind of like brown gray versus this gray, because they kind of went for that dated retro faceplate. So let's talk about first the CLA-2A. Now this thing is, the reason why it's called CLA-2A is because it's Chris Lord-Alge, very famous mix engineer. It's his version of the LA-2A. So it's not exactly the tone of an LA-2A, but it's kind of his take. And I'm sure it's based upon his probably best unit and, you know, whatever they modified in that unit. Next you have the Softtube / Native Instruments. It was actually created by Softtube, coded for Native Instruments. Softtube's an amazing company. They make amazing creations of tube circuitry in the digital kind of ones and zeros age of plugins. And then also you have the BX Opto, the Brainworx. These guys are known for their meticulous mastering grade plugins, and this plugin is also pretty meticulous. I'll get into it in a second. And then lastly, like I said, you have the OG here, which is a recreation of the original Teletronix LA-2A by Universal Audio themselves, who also do amazing plugins that use DSP. This one is gonna cost a little bit more to get into, but I do think it is probably the best sounding one out of the bunch here. So without spoiling too much, let's talk about what these things all have to offer, which one sounds better, which one is the best on the price budget area, and then which one, if I was on a desert island, I would go to, I would keep, and which ones I would just throw to the wind. Let's go. So the song I'm using today is Johnny Gillespie's Haunted. I'm gonna be taking his bass track, which is gonna be the raw DI, and I'm gonna be throwing all these different LA-2As on it. This is a common instrument that you're gonna put an optical compressor on, something that is gonna really smooth it out. But let's just take a listen, get you familiar with what we're working on.
When it all goes up in flames, who's the last one standing? Life is so fragile, I'm picking up the pieces. It goes without saying, can't fix the broken. People so shallow, I wish I wasn't hollow. One by one, oh, they shot me to the ground. Faith you would save me, just saving my soul. They gave me fever.
Okay, so if you can see that bass, it just needs some control. It's like certain notes are hitting a little bit louder than others, and also there's a lot of attack on it, you know. So we're gonna start to smooth these type of things out with an LA-2A. Now, I've used real LA-2As quite a bit. In fact, I own what's called a LA-3A, which is kind of the stepbrother compressor to the LA-2A. And that guy is just basically a solid state version of it. So I'm very familiar with the grab, the feel of these compressors. And I'm just gonna start compressing. I'm gonna start here with the CLA-2A. And I'm gonna explain kind of what I know and out of the use of this compressor, which I've used quite a bit because it's one of the elder plugins here.
When it all goes up in flames, who's the last one standing? Life is so fragile.
So immediately, if you're not used to an LA-2A, like kind of the feel of it, the knobs are very, very sensitive. So just very small moves on these knobs, such as like an original one, a hardware unit, is gonna make a huge difference. It's gonna be really a lot of compression. You can really crank these things and make these things compress something to death, like a nuclear apocalypse. But you know what? These compressors are great. That you kind of want that sensitivity because you want to be able to like get the feel of an LA-2A, and they've definitely modeled the feel of the knobs of a real one here. And for most part, most of these compressors they model the feel as well. Now, one thing to note on an LA-2A is that that meter is typically wrong in my opinion. When I'm hearing 1 to 2 dB of compression, and when I'm seeing that on the meter, I'm really hearing probably around 3 to 6. So don't believe, you know, what you're seeing as to what you're hearing. And, you know, this is a good way to kind of train yourself to understand compression, is to kind of dial these knobs and understand the LA-2A, because as you'll start to see, you'll start to use less compression the more that you start to hear how much it's compressing. But CLA-2A, you have some options here. You have this kind of this tone knob here at the bottom. You have flat and high frequency. In a real unit, this knob is actually on the back, and you can kind of change the bias of the tubes and change, you know, kind of the vibe of the compressor. So you kind of have a flat and a high frequency. Most of the time, it's straight up the middle. And you know, engineers, they would kind of tailor their LA-2A to have different kind of tonnage. And this kind of has to do with the high frequency versus the low. So it's really just kind of going up and down. And they put this knob on the front so you can really mess with it. I'll just show you kind of what it does. So as you can kind of see here, this is probably not the best example for showing you high end because it's a bass guitar and, you know, it doesn't have the most high harmonics going on. But I mean, automatically right away, if you take this all the way to high frequency, you can start to hear the attack of the guitar a lot more. You know, this one knob is really important when you start getting onto other instruments, if you're using on vocals or strings or something with a lot more brilliance to it. Also, you have 50, 60 hertz. This has to do with the power and the hum. Here in the United States, we have, you know, the 50 hertz. cycles, and then in Europe we have, they have the 60 hertz, and it just puts the noise of this compressor into different, octaves, and that's just having to do with the power that we have here versus Europe. The next thing you have is compress and limit. This is going to be on pretty much every LA-2A. It just changes the ratio of the compressor to basically a limiter. It makes it a brick wall. I have used LA-2A as a brick wall limiter. In certain cases, it's kind of not my go-to. There's a lot cooler limiters like a Fairchild 660 if you really want like kind of a gluey limiter feel. But yeah, you can certainly do it with LA-2A, and it's going to give you the vibe of an opto compressor. Next, you have gain, and you have peak reduction, and then you have some displays on your meter here. Now, if you're wondering why you would want to use LA-2A and versus something with a lot more options and knobs and stuff, I mean, this compressor gets it right just about every single time. Now, the cool thing of a optical compressor versus all the other compressors is it has a light bulb. The real hardware unit has a light bulb that turns on and off, and then it has a detector circuit that detects the light that hits it. Now, obviously, light moves thousands of miles per hour, and you're kind of getting a vibe off of that light. So what I mean by getting a vibe off of the light detector circuit is every time a transient hits an LA-2A, it reacts different as far as attack and release. Now, this is a variable attack and release compressor. That means you feed it different things and the attack and release adjust to the input signal. Now, that is kind of the famous part of this compressor. And that's why you get such a gluey sound, is because it's always changing. It's super variable. And that's why this is actually a really cool compressor to have as a hardware piece, because unlike digital, there's no algorithms. It's really just a light turning on and off, and it's really reacting in real time to this light bulb. So without that, you know what I mean? If you go into VCA or some of the other solid state options, plugins do a really amazing job of recreating, copying, cloning that in the digital realm. But with an LA-2A, you know what I mean? There's gonna be some, that sense of analogness that you're gonna be able to get out of a hardware unit. But to get back to these plugins, let's go to the next one. Next one I'm gonna bring up is this VC2A, not VCA. It's definitely not a VCA. The VC2A is an amazing plugin. This is probably one of my favorite ones out of the bunch. It has the right amount of, quality. I'd say there's been quality in the programming. It's a deep program, and you can tell they really tried to capture that variable optical circuit, within a real hardware unit. The only kind of differences you have here is you have a detector circuit where you can kind of roll off the low end. You can tell it to not detect, say, a kick drum. If you're mixing something like maybe a drum loop that has a kick drum in it, you can kind of move this shelf so the detector doesn't compress on the kick drum of the loop. And that's just super helpful to have that detector circuit. Also, you have this sidechain gain here, and you can sidechain this compressor. So that's a really cool option that they have here. It's kind of, adding some modern features to a kind of vintage piece. And another cool one, which is also adding modern features to a vintage piece here, is you have this dry wet. Now, this is really cool if you're doing parallel compression. You can do it right in the plugin versus having to open up a send and then, bounce it out with the original. You have this wet dry, and you're gonna find these in a lot of modern plugins. A lot of producers now really like doing parallel directly on the plugin. And this LA-2A is probably my favorite out of the bunch as far as price and quality. It's not the best sounding one, and it's not the most expensive one. So this is right in the middle. This is my recommendation. If you want to get a quality LA-2A, you can't really beat this guy. And, there are better sounding ones like the original Teletronix one that they have modeled here by Universal Audio. That guy is probably the best sounding one, but we'll get to that in a second. But first, let's check it out. Let me play the bass and kind of tweak the knobs. So as you can see, to me, this LA-2A just has a better feel to it. You know, you can feel the compressor breathing a little bit more, but not in like a bad, cheesy way. It has more of a natural breathe versus a weird freak out breathe. So this compressor just sounds more smooth, more natural when it comes to the transients. That's kind of the big thing I'm hearing the most. Like I said, it's kind of modeling that that opto detector circuit, and it's really doing a very good job of having this variable attack and release. So let's check it out one more time. I'm gonna kind of mess with the wet dry options too. We can kind of crush it, parallel it, and show you what maybe a parallel bass would sound like. Not that I would really do that, but. I guess you could parallel bass and use it more like a sub. It really, if you can see what the parallel is kind of doing to the feel, is it's like evening the sub frequencies of the bass out quite a bit to where it almost sounds like a sub. That, you know, the bass guitar now sounds very sub-like because it has this flat tone of that low end frequency that is being hyper compressed essentially. So this guy, really cool, highly recommended. You can start to, you know, really tweak it. It has enough tweakability to where, you know, you can do a lot of cool things in a modern mix, but it also has the vibe, the style of, you know, the more vintage kind of sounding LA-2A, like an actual real one. Now, certain things you don't see here. You don't have the tone option. You don't have, per se, the noise option. Not that that is really, you know, a big selling point for me personally. You know, in modern mixes, I'm just really trying to get rid of as much noise as possible. But let's move on to the next guy. Next up, we have the BX Opto. This is by Brainworx. These guys are meticulous coders who make some of the highest quality mastering grade plugins and used by tons of mastering engineers all around the world on your favorite records. But they have made their own version of the LA-2A. This thing is maybe not the closest representation to a original unit. They've kind of thrown their own vibe and their own style onto it. So it has, you know, a lot more options, especially on the sidechain here, if you can see. There's 3 options on the sidechain. And this really has to do with them seeing the need for maybe potentially using this plugin on the stereo bus on your master chain. So automatically, you can kind of see you have a lot of sidechain options here. You have kind of, you know, the option for frequency, as well as you have some roll-off options here too. Some band pass, high pass, low pass. You have your mix, your wet dry, just like the last plugin. And then also you have this cool little speed button. Now, you're wondering what the speed button does. Well, in a real LA-2A, you can kind of sort of change out the opto circuit to have different intensity of light bulbs. What that does will change the speed of the attack and release. So you can have kind of a slower speed LA-2A or a faster speed LA-2A. And actually, these are some of the mods that people do in the real hardware units, is put different, you know, quality light bulbs into the unit that will change the speed of the unit. So certain people, maybe you might want a faster LA-2A that you want to use on drums. There's definitely that option to put the T4 cell in there with that option. So what they've done is they've modeled all the different tolerances on that light bulb in this plugin. So back to these guys being mastering engineers and coding really deep codes, this LA-2A sounds really good. It actually has one of the smoothest compression circuits out of all these. And I'm not just going to keep talking about it, I'm going to play it and we're going to mess around. Wow, that is slow. You can see how big of a difference this speed knob makes. Now, this unit is actually going to be really good for people who maybe aren't spending a lot of money on plugins and maybe only want to buy a couple, because it's going to increase the versatility of this LA-2A. Now, the speed option really gives you the ability to use this on drums, or just dial in maybe this compressor exactly how you need it. Version of the LA-2A is maybe not the truest. It does have a cleaner quality to it, and doesn't have maybe the tone, the fuzz, the vibe, say as the universal audio option has, but it has probably one of the most complex compression circuits. It's going to feel very natural, and then also has the ability to go very fast, and has a lot of really good options as far as the sidechain usage, and then also the mix usage. So this plugin can really be the most versatile out of the options. Lastly, we're going to go to maybe the most expensive out of all these options. And the reason why it's the most expensive is because you're going to need UADs, digital signal processing, their DSP. You're going to either have to get a card, or you're going to have to get a satellite unit or one of their Apollo interfaces to be able to run this plugin. And what that does is it moves all of the processing that would be on your computer to an outboard piece, and allow this plugin to basically not run on your computers, which allows you to use more of these plugins. If you really want to stack this up on a mix, you're obviously moving that processing outboard. Let's just go ahead and play around with this unit, and I'll kind of talk about why it's the best sounding one. So, as you can see, this LA-2A probably has the most vibe out of all these. I think it kind of recreates the original hardware piece the best. It doesn't have, maybe the craziest algorithm, but the algorithm is kind of dead on to what I'm used to. I've used the real hardware unit quite a bit, and this definitely has the feel of that compressor. Unlike the BX Opto, you don't have a lot of options here. You basically have your core features on a hardware unit: limit, compress, and the same emphasis knob, messing around with the high end, such as the CLA-2A, and then you have meter options. So this is really, this is for someone who is, looking for very analog sound, someone who's used the original unit and is looking for that specific sound, that really wants to get as close as possible to recreating the sound of a original unit. I would recommend this if you have, some other options in your plugin catalog, and this is, a good way to go for the vibe. Now, if you're just starting off and you're looking to purchase an optical compressor, get into that realm, my two recommendations here are the BX Opto. This thing is very, very amazing sounding LA-2A. Maybe not the most vibey, but it's the most utility. It's more Swiss Army knife than the rest of these. And then if you want something that sounds really good, but has the vibe, has the feel of an LA-2A, but maybe it hasn't been taken all the way there, I recommend the VC2A by Native Instruments / Softtube. Now this thing is going to be the best bang for your buck. I think it's the cheapest out of the bunch. Actually, I would say the CLA-2A is probably the cheapest out of the bunch, but this thing is probably the most value. So this is the value buy. Now the CLA-2A will get the job done, and it'll get the feel. This thing is, I'll keep it real, a little outdated compared to the other options here, just because the computational powers of computers are a lot higher now, and the coating on this is probably a little bit underdone compared to its the competition, because this is a more vintage plugin. This thing has been around the longest, and maybe Waves will update it. We'll see. Who knows? But if you want kind of a buy-in to a plugin that has the optical sound, and you don't have maybe the highest budget, this thing is still a good option to purchase, but is maybe not my first go-to as far as an LA-2A if I had multiple plugin options of the same thing. It is lower on your CPU, it's lower on your bank account, and then also Waves is a pretty standard plugin set that you're going to find in most studios, so you really can't go wrong with buying this plugin, just because you'll be able to open it in a bunch of different studios and different situations. So as far as usability, it has a high usability, I'd say that. But if you really want the granddaddy, you really want the sound, you're an analog guy, you've been using LA-2As, you know the sound that you want, and you know the sound you're expecting, you really can't beat the LA-2A by Universal Audio. It has a bunch of different flavors. In fact, when you buy a Universal Audio interface, you actually get their LA-2A Legacy option, which is their older version of the plugin. It is very similar to the CLA-2A, and it's a good starter LA-2A, and if you ever want to upgrade, you have that option. All right, those are all the LA-2As I have to show you. You're going to figure out which one is going to work perfect for you. If you liked this episode, Radium Plugin of the Week, we have so much more. Go through all the old videos. You can follow us on Instagram, at KDEbeats, at Radium_media. And keep following, hit the notification bell for all the newest, latest, and greatest episodes coming straight to you.